Hello there Scapers, my name is Zenevilius and welcome to my DK's Revo++ guide. Hopefully this is the first of many Revo++ guides I'm going to introduce, and the aim of this particular guide is going to be to do DKs using Revo++ with the least amount of attention and clicking required. Not only from the point of view of using abilities, but also from the point of view of clicking in general, or paying attention in general. So that's going to be the goal of this video. Now I haven't done a DK's guide for about 4.5 to 5 years, and that was an extremely long one, so I'm going to hope to make this a quick one, and it should be quick if you have everything that I'm going to recommend, because all you got to do is AFK and click occasionally. So the main part of this video, the main focus is going to be the action bar, which as you can see it looks a little bit weird, but I've optimized it just for DKs, having done a few hours of testing. But before I get into that, let's get into the gear and inventory setups. So firstly, my gear is orientated towards hybrid. I want to minimize the amount of switching I do, so I've got two-handed weapons for each of the 3 combat styles, and I have also got hybrid gear. So I've got Animal Core of Sliske augmented with some Slayer perks since I'm on a Slayer task, but also with Scavenging 3 for those components. And you may wish to use different perks here. You may wish to use those really good bossing perks, which is generally what you should do for killing bosses, but I'm going to use this because I'm on a Slayer task. Slayer helmet because I'm on a Slayer task as well. And for hybrid gear there are several options if you don't want to use Sliske gear. You can use the War Priest, you can use I believe the Gemstone outfit and a few other things, but I would recommend Sliske augmented with whatever perks you want to have. Got the Amulet of Souls for healing, Luck of the Dwarves, which is a no-brainer these days I believe. Rune Pouch because I'm using a Saren Godbow, but if you're not, you may wish to use a quiver with some arrows in it and air runes in inventory. But yeah, since I've saved a bit of space by using a Saren Godbow. Obviously my main had melee weapon. A God Book just for the stat boost. I don't aim to actually activate it. That would be a waste of money at a boss like DK's. Pharaonics Boots 4 for noting the Dagannoth bones. And Aura, probably best one to use here is Penance, because you will get your prayer back up very easily without having to use any potions. But you can also use Vampirism if you're struggling to heal your HP back up, and Supreme Reverence is probably your third best option here. Cinderbane gloves are probably the best gloves to use, along with weapon poison. So my inventory is fairly straightforward. The only 3 things I'm actually probably going to be clicking are the 2 weapons and Excalibur, and occasionally noting my items. I've got an hour and a half's worth of overloads, slightly over an hour and a half's worth, and prayer renewals and weapon poison flasks, and a couple of noted items just as placeholders for the water tallies and Dagannoth bones. Spring cleaner to dismantle some of the stuff. If you have an advanced gold accumulator or a gold accumulator, please do use it. I don't have enough tokens, so I haven't got that. And I think that's pretty much it. So my familiar is a legendary pet, so that I minimize the amount of effort I put into picking stuff up. Although you should probably still pay a bit of attention because it doesn't pick up all the Dagannoth bones, and the other drops, some are valuable of course, like the rings and hatchets. And the pets, of course, you want to pick the pets up, guys, no doubt about that. So yeah, that's why I've got the legendary pet. Also I can extend it up to 2 hours, so I don't have to bring an extra pouch. But if you want, you can bring a unicorn or something like that just to heal up if you're not confident in your DPS abilities with the weapons you have or whatever, until you get used to it a bit more. Or you can bring a pack yak to bank all your stuff without noting it, because that's much cheaper than using note paper, which is much more expensive. And in it I don't have much, just a bit of random stuff, some prayers and some food in no particular order, but I don't intend on using this unless it's an emergency, given my action bar, given my Excalibur, given Soul Split, given my Amulet of Souls, and given the weapons I'm using for DPS. So that is pretty much the setup I'm going to be using, and that's what I would recommend. To get to it, fastest way is obviously use the max portal, otherwise you can use the DK's tele tab to tele you pretty close to it, like so. I'm glad they introduced this as a drop, to be honest, because it's so much more convenient than having to run through from the entrance to Waterbirth Island, which you can get to via Relica, but this is much more easy. You can buy this teletab off the GE, and yeah, this is the way to get to it. I'm going to time this so that I count all my XP and all my drops in the 1 hour 40 or whatever I think it is. 1 hour 48 minutes is going to be with all these potions if I time it correctly. Whatever it is, I'm going to stay here until my overloads run out. And thankfully they've added this jump over rocks option so you can peacefully start a custom session. I don't have enough GP, that's embarrassing. But yeah, you can start a custom session and go in. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. Once you go in, I will tell you how to go about it and how this Revo bar does the job for AFK gains. Now the first thing I realized was that only testing this one action bar was kind of pointless, because you should really compare a few different action bars to see which is the best method to both AFK but also do decent kills per hour. So this is just the first action bar that I tried out, but before I went in there I had to get GP and realized that Weapon Poison Plus Plus lasted 10 minutes a dose, so I only needed 2 flasks rather than 3, and that's exactly what I did. I got those and I went in. As soon as I went in, I got my first drop for my collection, the Archer's Ring, which is practically worthless, but I'll definitely take that. And the main idea behind killing DKs is just to stand in the center near the ladder, kill Supreme first, and then Rex, and then Prime, and go in that order. I would always choose the fastest spawn for the custom session unless you have much lower level weapons than tier 90, in which case you can choose fast. And you should be able to kill them about as quickly as they spawn. Sometimes a bit slower, and you can always catch up by paying a bit more attention and manually using abilities to kill them up quicker to get back on track with the rate. But that's pretty much it. If you set your legendary pet to scavenge only the drops that you're interested in, it will be very efficient at it. It will only be able to scavenge 1 drop, so I would be selective about what you choose for it. But this method works really well. So as soon as I went in, I realized that I had to make a few changes. The first thing was a minor change, swapping out Piercing Shot with Dazing Shot for increased DPS. And one thing to note with this ability rotation is that you will almost never be standing around waiting for cooldowns, except when you just come into the fight and you're building up to 50% adrenaline. As soon as you get going in the fight, you will not have to wait around for any abilities, and that's why I like this bar. Now you may be wondering, why did I put Sacrifice at the first slot and Tusked Rat in the last slot? Well, Sacrifice in the first slot is like a universal basic ability no matter what combat style you're using, and it will give you some extra heals as well. If you're not using Vampirism, you will need Sacrifice as your first ability. That's one part of the story. The other part is that in order to fit everything into one action bar, there are only 14 spaces. I had to use 4 abilities for each of the 3 styles, and then use 2 common abilities, no matter which combat style I was using, in order to get this to work. And Sacrifice fitted the bill, not only for the healing aspect but also for this. And Tusked Rat, although it doesn't hit 12Ks on Dagannoth Kings because they're bosses, it's still a decent ability to use, which is why I put it in the last slot in case anything else is on cooldown. That can be used as a basic to boost your adrenaline and keep the DPS going. Now I realized that with this ability bar, because of having to fit everything into one, you will have 100% adrenaline a lot of the time. And since you're not using any ultimates, and you can only really use 2 thresholds in this crammed space of 1 action bar with Revo++, you might want to occasionally use some other threshold on the side, and that's what I've got in CV and B. I've got the 2 tendrils and bombardment. Now I would use the 3rd range tendril as well, but that just takes away too much damage from you, so I didn't think it was worth putting on there. And in fact I made a few changes over the course of this testing to make my life easier. So the first thing I did was put my weapon switches and my prayers on my secondary and tertiary action bars, as you can see. This made my life very easy because as soon as I killed one boss, I would just have to click 2 buttons to switch my weapon and my prayer, and with auto retaliate and maybe just click the boss, it would carry on in its merry way. The other changes I made was to put all my other potions on my action bar as well to make my life easier, and it turned out to be very, very AFK. I had to do very little. I was still getting really good kills per hour. I wasn't really struggling because I was using Vampirism. The only problem was I had to renew my prayer quite a bit because of how quickly it was draining. So something like a Holy Wrench or using Penance and Supreme Reverence might be better. If you're happy with the amount you're being healed, there's no reason to keep using Vampirism. So just keep using those, keep repotting, and pick up the Dagannoth Bones and occasional rare drops that your pet doesn't pick up. So after the 30 minutes of testing this particular action bar, I decided to change up my scavenge options to make my pet more focused in what it picked up. And although it won't ever pick up all your stuff that you want it to, this made it a lot more selective and smooth. I also decided, since I finished my Slayer task, that I would get the Strength Cape perk because I was going to be trying something new at this point. So I got my Strength Cape perk, put it on my trim comp, and that gave me the ability for Dismember, the strength ability, to last 2 seconds longer, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. So after doing this test and logging all my data, I decided to do my other test with the classic Revo++ bars, if you like. The ones involving the ultimate in the first slot, 2 powerful thresholds in the second and third slots, and the remaining being your best to worst basics, as is standard in these cases. However, I made a few changes. So again, I used the same theory with Sacrifice and Tusker's Wrath. Again, you may not wish to use this theory, especially now that you're using specialist bars each time you switch between styles. You don't really need those extra buffer abilities. You won't ever really be going off cooldown on any of your abilities. So you may not want to use them, but they're still nice to use, especially Sacrifice for the heals. And everything else pretty much stayed the same. The first thing I realized as soon as I started this test was that using these ultimates as your first ability in general at Dagannoth Kings was a huge waste of adrenaline, because in the best case scenario, your ultimates would happen to activate at the start of you killing one of the Dagannoth Kings, and you would build up to 50%. By the time you got up to 50% within your death swiftness or whatever, your prime would already be dead, and you would switch styles and just waste that death swiftness. So what I decided quickly was that instead of putting ultimates like Berserk, Sunshine and Death Swiftness in my first slot, which is a classical Revo++ method, for DKs this wouldn't work, and therefore what I decided was to swap these out for other ultimates that would do a big chunk of damage and then disappear rather than staying on for 30 seconds or whatever it was. So I replaced Death Swiftness with Deadshot, replaced Sunshine with Tsunami, and I replaced Berserk with Meteor Strike. I'm not sure Meteor Strike was the best option to replace Berserk with, since I'm only attacking one enemy, but whatever. And the same with Tsunami, but it was just to improve things, and I knew that there would be no point testing Sunshine and Death Swiftness and Berserk. Maybe Berserk had a bit more to it than the other two, but I didn't see any reason to test those, so about 4 or 5 minutes in, I swapped those out and finished my 30-minute test and got those results as well, and that was a pretty good session, except for one big thing. I was absolutely atrocious at switching both my weapons and my action bars. Despite keybinding everything, I think switching the action bars was a bit of a pain because, I don't know, I'm not used to switching my action bars too much, which is why I preferred the first method I showed you guys. And finally, I used the last action bar to replace the first ultimate with another threshold and move all the thresholds up a priority. So put, for example, Assault and Hurricane in my first 2 slots, and my third slot being Blood Tendrils. Now this I thought would probably be the best method out of the 3, but I quickly realized that putting Tendrils on my Revo++ bar was a bit of a risky move. My HP would generally tend to go down quite quickly, so I swapped those out with other thresholds. So for example, I swapped out Blood Tendrils with Quake, I swapped out Magic Tendrils with Impact, and I didn't use Shadow. That probably would have killed me instantly. I used Bombardment instead. So that's what I went with for the last 30 minutes of testing. And again, I had some switching problems, which might just be me. I think you do have to pay quite a bit of attention if you're going to be switching both action bars and weapons and prayers, which I wasn't really used to. So that cost me a few slow kills, if you like. But the biggest problem was delays. So for example, after you asphyxiate, there's a delay with Revo++, which there wouldn't be if you were using full manual. After using Snipe, there is a delay with Revo++, which costs you both adrenaline and time and DPS. So these things have to be taken into account. That's one of the reasons why Fury isn't on the action bar. Fury, before you use Assault, is one of the best ways to max out your DPS if you were using full manual, but obviously this is an AFK guide, so I didn't do that. So there were a few bits here and there. I did learn a few things over the course of this testing that I thought I knew before, but I didn't. And yeah, I got quite a bit of data. Let's have a look at what I received and finalize everything. I just have some simple bones collected data here, which basically says how many kills I did in 30 minutes, each 30-minute test. And if you have a look, the best performer was surprisingly number 2, where I used this particular action bar, as you can see, for example, for ranged here. The second best was my first action bar, which was this one. And the third best was basically this one, but with the first ability being bombardment. So doing this straight swap between bombardment and deadshot, and then moving everything up by 1. So those are the 3 different ability bars I used. And the clear winner, well, not the clear winner, but the slight winner was number 2, which involved switching ability bars and weapons and prayers, but definitely seems to be worth it, because if you adjust the kills per hour, accounting for the fact that I did my first ability bar test with the Slayer Helmet boost, the mighty Slayer Helmet boost of 14% extra damage, I take that away, then you can see the difference even more clearly. Number 2 was 149 kills in 30 minutes. Number 1 has now been reduced to 128, so that's 298 versus 256 kills per hour, which is a huge difference. And this is all despite the fact that I was pretty bad at switching between ability bars in time. But at the same time, I gotta say that I was using some of my secondary thresholds quite often, which are the ones you see on my secondary bars, C, V and B. Smoke tendrils, blood tendrils and bombardment. So there's a lot of random stuff on these bars, but the main thing to know are these 3 abilities, the switches between weapons and prayers, the prayer pot and the other pots keybinded. And that is pretty much it. Everything else is sort of for other bosses. And yeah, that is my conclusion, guys. So this particular ability bar and this particular setup is the one you should be using. There's been a slight change since the introductory setup that I showed you, but everything else is fairly similar. So the 2 things I'm going to say to finish off are that I haven't experimented with putting a tertiary threshold after the first 3 basics, which is a good idea because these 3 basics are so much better than the other 3. So you might want to put bombardment, for example, where D is, and move everything up. But I don't want to extend my action bar because I like this one. I've got my food and my quick prayers for bosses keybinded, which isn't really necessary, but you can extend it if you'd like and put some more thresholds on. I'm pretty certain this is the best way of AFKing DKs. It's not really that AFK. I mean, there's not much difference between this and you know, going full manual or using abilities, timing abilities as you would at a proper boss if you like. For example, if you do snipe, you do still want to use corruption shot manually if you want to save some ticks and things like that. So this is the setup I would recommend. I hope you enjoyed this video and you found it useful. If you have any questions or comments, let me know below. Obviously these ability bars aren't 100% optimal, but I've done a lot of testing and I think they are. And I really like this method for AFKing DKs. I'm going to be doing this until I get all 3 pets and hopefully get the title as well. So wish me luck. I wish you guys luck, and I will see you hopefully in the next Revo++ AFK DPS guide.